My stepmother kept telling people my real mom abandoned me because I wasn't worth keeping, so I showed her what abandonment actually feels like. Delilah moved in 3 months after Mom's funeral, redecorating our house like she was erasing every trace of our previous life. At dinner parties, she'd lean in conspiratorially and whisper to guests about my difficult behavior and how my real mother just couldn't cope with such a troubled child. She walked out when Kai was 8, Delilah would say, dabbing fake tears. Never even said goodbye. Can you imagine abandoning your own daughter like that? Mom died of cancer, slowly, painfully. I held her hand through every chemo session, every sleepless night. But Delilah rewrote history to make herself the heroic stepmother who rescued damaged goods. The lies got bolder. At my school's parent night, she told teachers I had abandonment issues from being thrown away by my birth mother. She suggested I needed therapy for attachment disorders I didn't have. When other parents asked about my mom, Delilah would shake her head sadly. Some women just aren't cut out for motherhood, she'd sigh. Thank goodness Kai has me now. Dad believed her version, or maybe he preferred it. Easier than admitting he'd replaced Mom before the dirt settled on her grave. I started recording everything. Her fake crying sessions, her victim performance, her lies about my supposed behavioral problems. For 3 years, I collected evidence of her psychological warfare. The breaking point came at my 16th birthday party. While I was getting cake plates, I heard Delilah telling her book club about my genetic predisposition to abandonment. Her mother had the same instability, she explained. Just got up one day and left. Kai's probably inherited those same defective patterns. That night, I activated my plan. I'd been babysitting and pet sitting since 13, hiding money Delilah never knew existed. By 16, I had enough to disappear completely. I waited until Dad left for his annual fishing trip with his brothers. Tuesday morning, I packed my essentials and left a single note on Delilah's vanity. Now you'll know what real abandonment feels like. Unlike my mom, I'm choosing to leave. I moved in with my Aunt Rosemary 4 states away. She'd been Mom's sister, the one Delilah had systematically cut from our lives with her poisonous stories. For 6 months, I lived quietly, finishing high school online and working at Rosemary's Bakery. Delilah called the police, claimed I was kidnapped, played the devastated stepmother perfectly, but I was legally free to live with family. Through Dad's brother, I heard about the aftermath. Without me as her charity case project, Delilah's perfect stepmother image crumbled. Dad discovered she'd been intercepting cards and letters from Mom's side of the family for years. Her lies started unraveling, but I'd saved the most devastating revelation for last. On the anniversary of Mom's death, I mailed Dad copies of texts I'd found in Delilah's phone, messages to her sister from 2 weeks before Mom's funeral, complaining about having to wait for the cancer patient to finally die before she could redecorate. Dad called me that night, sobbing. The divorce papers were filed the next morning. Last month, exactly 2 years after I left, I received a package from an attorney. Inside was a key and a letter from Delilah, now living in a studio apartment across town. She'd lost everything in the divorce. The house, the money, the social status she'd craved. The letter was brief. You win. But there's something about your mother's death you don't know. Something I never told your father. I stared at those words for an hour, my hands shaking. What could Delilah possibly know about Mom's death that I didn't? I was there. I held Mom's hand as she took her last breath. I watched the monitors flatline. I helped Dad plan the funeral. The key was attached to a small cardboard tag with an address, Storage Unit 247B on the outskirts of town, about 20 minutes from where Delilah now lived. I called Rosemary and told her about the letter. Don't go alone, she said immediately. That woman has caused enough damage. This could be another manipulation, but I had to know. The not knowing would eat me alive, just like Delilah intended. The next Saturday, Rosemary and I drove to the storage facility. The key worked. Inside Unit 247B were boxes of documents, photo albums I'd never seen, and medical records dating back years before Mom's diagnosis. The first box contained correspondence between Delilah and various doctors. Not Mom's doctors, different ones, oncologists from other states. The letters were inquiries about experimental treatments, second opinions, alternative therapies, all dated from when Mom was still in early-stage treatment. Why would Delilah be contacting doctors? I asked, confused. Rosemary was examining a thick manila folder. Her face had gone pale. Kai, she said quietly, you need to see this. Inside the folder were copies of Mom's real medical records. Not the simplified versions they'd shown me as a child, but the complete files. Treatment recommendations, prognosis updates, and something that made my blood run cold, a series of notes about delayed treatment decisions. According to the records, Mom's cancer had been caught much earlier than I'd been told. Stage 1, highly treatable. The survival rate was over 90%, but treatment had been delayed for months while family considerations were discussed. Family considerations. There were insurance forms showing Dad as the primary decision-maker for Mom's care. Forms he'd apparently sat on for 3 months without signing. During those 3 months, the cancer had progressed from stage 1 to stage 3. By the time treatment finally began, Mom's chances of survival had dropped to less than 30%. I don't understand, I whispered. Why would Dad delay her treatment? Rosemary pulled out another folder. This one contained financial documents, life insurance policies, Dad's business records, and bank statements showing significant debts I'd never known about. The timeline became horrifyingly clear. Dad's construction business had been failing for years. He'd taken out loans against the house, maxed out credit cards, even borrowed from Mom's retirement account. The business was months away from bankruptcy when Mom was diagnosed. Mom's life insurance policy was worth $2 million, but only if she died within the first 5 years of the policy, a clause that would expire 6 months after her diagnosis. No, I said, backing away from the documents. No, that's not possible. Dad loved Mom. He wouldn't, but the evidence was right there. Dad had delayed Mom's treatment until the cancer became terminal, ensuring she'd die within the insurance window, and Delilah had helped him do it. There were copies of emails between Dad and Delilah, dated 8 months before Mom's death. They'd been planning this long before Mom got sick. Delilah had researched the insurance clause. She'd found doctors who would provide second opinions about waiting to ensure the treatment was exactly right. The last folder contained recordings, audio files on old cassette tapes labeled with dates from Mom's final month. With trembling hands, I put the first tape into a dusty player someone had left in the storage unit. Mom's voice filled the small space, weak but clear. I keep asking Richard why we're waiting for the experimental treatment. The doctor said the standard chemo could start immediately, but he says Delilah found a better option, and we just need to be patient. A pause, then. I trust him. He's taking such good care of me. Delilah, too. She brings me soup every day and sits with me when Richard's at work. I'm so lucky to have them both. I stopped the tape and vomited in the corner of the storage unit. Rosemary rubbed my back as I sobbed. Your mom never knew, she said softly. She thought they were trying to save her. But Delilah knew. She knew Mom was dying because they weren't treating her, and she sat by her bedside, pretending to care. I understood now why Delilah had kept all this evidence. It wasn't guilt. It was insurance. If Dad ever turned on her, she could prove he'd been the mastermind. She'd kept every document that implicated him while destroying anything that pointed directly to her. But she'd made one mistake. In her arrogance, she'd kept evidence that implicated them both. The next box contained what looked like a journal in Delilah's handwriting. Daily entries starting 3 months before Mom's death. Day 12. Richard is wavering. He keeps looking at treatment options online. Need to remind him about the insurance deadline. If we wait much longer, the cancer will be too advanced for anyone to question why treatment failed. Day 28. Made Richard promise not to tell the doctors about previous symptoms. If they realize how long we've known, they might rush into treatment. Need at least another month. Day 41. Perfect. Second opinion doctor agrees we should wait for optimal treatment window. Richard is buying it completely. He actually thinks we're being thorough. Day 67. Getting harder to watch her suffer, but we're too close to stop now. Richard broke down last night. Wanted to start chemo immediately. Reminded him about losing the house, Kai's college fund, everything. He's staying strong. Day 89. It's working. Oncologist says cancer has spread too far for cure, but treatment might buy her 6 months. Richard looked relieved. He knows we're past the insurance deadline now. I read entry after entry, watching Delilah chronicle Mom's murder like she was planning a dinner party. The final entry was dated the day before Mom died. She asked if I'll take care of Kai. Promised her I would. Such an easy lie to tell a dying woman. Tomorrow this will all be over, and Richard and I can finally start our real life together. Rosemary had gone quiet, reading over my shoulder. She killed your mother, she said. Not the cancer. Her and your father. They murdered Elena. I called the district attorney's office that afternoon. The receptionist transferred me to a detective specializing in insurance fraud. Detective Morrison listened to my story for 2 hours. I played the audio recordings, showed her the documents, read sections from Delilah's journal. This is substantial evidence, she said finally. But it's been 4 years. The statute of limitations on insurance fraud is 5 years, so we're still within the window. But murder has no statute of limitations. This is murder? Withholding life-saving medical treatment that results in death? In the state of Ohio, that's depraved heart murder. First degree. Your father and stepmother conspired to cause your mother's death for financial gain. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within a week, Detective Morrison had subpoenaed Dad's financial records, confirmed the business debts, and verified the insurance timeline. She interviewed Mom's original oncologist, who confirmed that early treatment would have saved her life. Dad was arrested at his new apartment on a Thursday morning. Delilah was picked up an hour later at the grocery store where she'd been working since the divorce. The local news picked up the story immediately. Local businessman, accused of wife's murder for insurance money. The article included photos of Dad and Delilah being led away in handcuffs. I watched the coverage from Rosemary's living room, feeling hollow. For 4 years, I'd grieved Mom's death as a tragedy. Learning it was murder changed everything. The grief became rage. The sadness became fury. But underneath it all was a strange sense of relief. Mom hadn't abandoned me. She'd been stolen from me. The trial began 8 months later. I testified on the second day, reading portions of Delilah's journal to the jury. When I got to the entry about promising to take care of me, half the jurors were crying. Dad's defense attorney tried to argue that he'd been manipulated by Delilah, that she'd taken advantage of his financial desperation and emotional vulnerability. The prosecutor destroyed that argument by showing the jury emails where Dad had initiated conversations about the insurance timing. Delilah's attorney claimed the journal was fiction, creative writing meant to process her complicated feelings about becoming a stepmother to a grieving child. But the audio recordings corroborated every detail. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy. Dad got life without parole. Delilah got 30 years with possibility of parole after 20. At sentencing, the judge allowed me to read a victim impact statement. My mother died believing she was loved, I said, looking directly at Dad and Delilah. She spent her final months grateful for your care, never knowing you were killing her for money. She worried about leaving me behind, not knowing you'd already planned to destroy every memory of her love. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes, but Delilah stared at me with cold hatred. I hope every day in prison you remember her voice on those recordings. I hope you remember how she trusted you. And I hope you think about what it felt like when I abandoned you, because that's the closest you'll ever come to understanding what you did to her. After sentencing, Detective Morrison pulled me aside. There's something else, she said. We found additional evidence in your father's business records, a safety deposit box we didn't know about. Inside the box were Mom's original jewelry, documents about her family's estate, and a sealed letter addressed to me. The letter was dated 2 weeks before Mom's death. My hands shook as I opened it. My darling Kai, it began. If you're reading this, it means I didn't survive. I want you to know that every moment of your life has been my greatest joy. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and nothing, not even death, can change how much I love you. The letter continued for 3 pages, full of memories I'd forgotten and advice for the life she wouldn't see me live. But the final paragraph stopped me cold. I need you to know something important. I've been feeling like something is wrong with my treatment. The delays don't make sense, and some things your father and Delilah have said don't match what the doctors told me privately. I've hidden copies of my real medical records in our safety deposit box. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll investigate. Trust your instincts, sweetheart. They've never led you wrong. Even dying, Mom had been trying to protect me. I moved back to our old house after Dad's assets were unfrozen. The insurance money, the money that cost Mom her life, went into a trust for cancer research. I couldn't touch it. Couldn't spend a single dollar of blood money. The house felt different now. Delilah's renovations looked garish and desperate, like she'd been trying to erase Mom's influence through sheer force of bad taste. I spent weeks undoing her changes, finding Mom's belongings in the garage and basement where Delilah had hidden them. In Mom's old jewelry box, I found something Delilah had missed. A small digital recorder, the kind Mom used to leave herself reminders. The last recording was from the day before she died. I figured it out, Mom's weak voice whispered. Richard thinks I don't understand what's happening, but I do. The delayed treatment, the false hope about experimental therapies, Delilah's sudden appearance in our lives right when Richard's business started failing. I know about the insurance policy. I know about the debts. A pause then. I don't have enough time left to fight this, and I won't put Kai through a custody battle. But I've documented everything. Someday, when she's strong enough, she'll find the truth. And when she does, I know she'll make sure justice is served. Even facing death, Mom had been thinking about protecting me. I played that recording at her grave on the 5th anniversary of her death. You were right, Mom, I said to the headstone. I found the truth, and I made sure they paid for what they did to you. The wind picked up, scattering the flowers I'd brought. For just a moment, I could have sworn I smelled her perfume. 2 years later, I got a letter from the state prison. Delilah had requested a meeting. Against Rosemary's advice, I agreed to see her. She looked older, harder. Prison had stripped away the fake vulnerability she'd worn like makeup. What remained was the cold calculation I'd glimpsed in her journal entries. I want you to know I don't regret anything, she said without preamble. Your mother was weak. She would have died eventually anyway. At least her death served a purpose. The purpose of making you rich? The purpose of giving your father a second chance, of giving us both a life we deserved. I leaned forward. How's that life working out for you? Her jaw tightened. You destroyed everything. You couldn't just let sleeping dogs lie. Sleeping dogs? I laughed. You murdered my mother and told the world she abandoned me. You spent years trying to convince me I was genetically defective, and you think I should have let it go? She was going to die anyway. She had a 90% survival rate with immediate treatment. Statistics don't guarantee anything. No, but withholding treatment guarantees death. That's what you and Dad counted on. Delilah's mask slipped completely. You self-righteous little bitch. You think you're so much better than us? Your precious mother wasn't the saint you remember. She knew Richard was having financial problems. She could have insisted on treatment, could have forced him to sign the paperwork. Instead, she trusted him to make decisions. Her weakness killed her, not us. I stood up. You know what the difference is between you and Mom? She trusted people because she loved them. You manipulate people because you hate them. Mom died surrounded by love, fake love, but she didn't know that. You'll die alone in a cell, and everyone who ever cared about you will know exactly who you really are. I turned to leave. Your father says he wants to see you, Delilah called after me. He's been asking for years. Says he has things to explain. I stopped but didn't turn around. Tell Dad I said he can explain himself to Mom when he sees her in hell. The drive home was peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. Delilah's hatred couldn't touch me anymore. Her lies had been exposed. Her manipulation had been turned against her. Most importantly, Mom's memory had been restored. The people who'd heard Delilah's lies now knew the truth. Mom hadn't abandoned me. She'd been murdered trying to trust the people she loved most. I started a blog called Stolen Goodbyes, sharing mom's story and connecting with other people whose loved ones had been victims of insurance fraud. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people shared their own stories of delayed treatment, suspicious deaths, and family members who'd prioritized money over medical care. Detective Morrison helped me launch a nonprofit focused on investigating suspicious insurance claims. We worked with families to uncover evidence of fraud and helped law enforcement build cases against perpetrators. In our first year, we helped convict 12 people of insurance fraud resulting in wrongful death. The second year, we stopped 4 active conspiracies before they could kill their intended victims. The work was heartbreaking but necessary. Each case reminded me that Mom's death, while senseless, had led to something meaningful. Her murder had taught me to recognize the signs, to ask the right questions, to fight for truth when others preferred comfortable lies. On Mom's birthday, I visited her grave with a stack of letters from families we'd helped. I read each one aloud, telling her about the lives we'd saved in her memory. A woman in Tennessee whose husband tried to delay her stroke treatment for insurance money. We caught him before she died, and she's making a full recovery. A man in Colorado whose business partner tried to convince him to refuse cancer treatment while secretly taking out policies on his life. He's cancer-free now, and his partner is in prison. A teenage girl whose stepfather was withholding her diabetes medication to trigger a fatal incident. She's safe with her grandmother now. I folded the letters and placed them on Mom's headstone. "Your death wasn't meaningless," I whispered. "It was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it wasn't meaningless." The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the cemetery. For a moment, I could almost see Mom sitting beside me, young and healthy like she'd been before cancer, before Delilah, before everything went wrong. "I miss you every day," I said, "but I'm not angry anymore. I found the truth just like you knew I would, and I'm using it to protect other people from going through what we did." A cardinal landed on Mom's headstone, her favorite bird. She used to say cardinals were messages from people we'd lost, letting us know they were still watching over us. I smiled and pulled out my phone. There was a voicemail from Detective Morrison about a new case, a suspicious death in Arizona that showed all the signs of insurance fraud. "Looks like we have work to do," I told the cardinal. It flew away, bright red against the darkening sky. I drove home thinking about Mom's final recording, how she'd predicted I would find the truth and seek justice. She'd known me better than I'd known myself. Even facing death, she'd believed in my strength. That night, I called Rosemary and told her about my visit with Delilah. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I said. "For the first time since Mom died, I feel completely free. Delilah can't hurt me anymore. Her lies can't touch Mom's memory. And Dad made his choice a long time ago. I don't need his explanations or his apologies." "Your mother would be so proud of you," Rosemary said. "The woman you've become, the work you're doing. You turned the worst thing that ever happened to you into something beautiful." I looked at the framed photo of Mom on my desk, the one Delilah had tried to hide, showing Mom laughing in our old kitchen before she got sick. She looked so alive, so full of joy. "I hope so," I said. "I really hope so." The next morning, I got a call from a woman in Michigan whose sister had died under suspicious circumstances. Her brother-in-law had delayed treatment for months, claiming he was researching the best options. Now he'd collected a substantial life insurance payout and married his deceased wife's former best friend. "I found your blog," the woman said. "I think my sister was murdered, but I don't know how to prove it. Tell me everything," I said, reaching for my notepad. As she spoke, I heard echoes of Mom's story. The delayed treatment, the false reassurances, the convenient remarriage. The pattern was always the same. Trust weaponized against love, hope perverted into a murder weapon. "We're going to help you," I promised her. "And we're going to make sure your sister gets justice." I hung up and looked at Mom's photo again. "One more case," I told her. "One more family gets their truth." The cardinal was back at my window, bright red feathers catching the morning light. It stayed there for a long moment, as if it were listening, then flew away toward the rising sun. I opened my laptop and began typing the case report. Somewhere in Michigan, a murderer thought he'd gotten away with the perfect crime. He was about to learn what Delilah and Dad had learned too late, that some daughters never stop fighting for their mothers. The work continued, the truth continued, and Mom's love, twisted into lies for so many years, finally shone clear and bright, lighting the way forward for every family that came after us. In the end, abandonment had taught me about belonging, lies had taught me about truth, and death had taught me how to live. That was Mom's final gift to me, not just the evidence that convicted her killers, but the strength to use that evidence to save others. She'd known that losing her would either destroy me or forge me into something stronger. She'd bet on strength and she'd won. I didn't start it, but I definitely finished it moment. I was 22, fresh out of college, working as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. My supervisor, Brendan, was one of those guys who peaked in high school and never got over it. 38 years old, still talking about his football glory days, still treating women like we existed solely for his entertainment and convenience. It started small, the way these things always do. Comments about my outfits, how I should smile more because I looked too serious for such a pretty girl. Jokes about finding me a boyfriend who could handle me and teach me how to have fun. I ignored it initially, thinking it would stop if I just kept my head down and did good work. My cubicle was positioned right outside his glass office, so escape wasn't an option. "Morning, Delilah," he'd say every day, leaning over my desk so his coffee breath hit my face. "That's a tight little dress. Trying to impress someone special today?" I'd force a smile and turn back to my computer, but he'd linger, making comments about my legs or asking if I was wearing that new perfume just for him. His voice carried that tone men use when they think they're being charming but actually sound predatory. You know, you'd be even prettier if you smiled more, he'd say, then laugh like it was the most original observation ever made. The other women in the office would shoot me sympathetic looks but never said anything directly. I understood why later. The whispered conversations in the bathroom told the real story. 3 women had already been forced out after filing complaints against Brendan. Their careers were systematically destroyed, their references poisoned, their reputations smeared across the industry. Just keep your head down and don't give him any ammunition, whispered Patricia from payroll during one of our brief kitchen encounters. He gets bored eventually if you don't react. Jennifer tried to fight back last year and now she can't get hired anywhere in the city. But Brendan wasn't getting bored with me. If anything, my lack of response seemed to encourage him. He interpreted my professional politeness as playing hard to get. Then came the touching. It started with a hand on my shoulder that lingered too long during meetings. Accidental bumps in the hallway where his hand would graze my chest or hip. When I wore dresses, he'd find excuses to walk by my desk and look down my neckline, sometimes even bending over to point at something on my computer screen. "Let me show you how to fix that spreadsheet error," he'd say, pressing his body against my back as he reached over to use my mouse. His breath would be hot on my neck, his hand sometimes, accidentally, brushing my breast as he moved. I started documenting everything in a secret folder on my personal laptop. Times, dates, witnesses present, exact quotes when I could remember them, but I felt completely powerless. Brendan was best friends with Thomas, the HR director. They played golf together every weekend at the country club. He was also tight with 2 of the senior partners, having gone to college with one and serving as best man at the other's wedding. The company culture made it clear that Brendan was untouchable. He brought in the biggest clients, had connections throughout the industry, and was being groomed for a partnership track. Meanwhile, I was a recent graduate with student loans and no family connections. Who would believe me? Who would even care? "Don't take it personally," advised Melissa from the front desk. "That's just how Brendan is. He doesn't mean anything by it." But I could see in her eyes that she knew better. She was just protecting herself by staying invisible. Things escalated gradually over my first 6 months. Brendan started calling me into his office for private consultations about my work. These sessions would last an hour or more, during which he'd sit on the edge of his desk instead of behind it, positioning himself so I had to look up at him. He'd compliment my appearance more than my actual work performance. "You're really blossoming here, Delilah," he'd say, his eyes scanning my body. "I can see you have a lot of potential. With the right guidance and mentorship, you could go far in this company." The implication was always clear. The right mentorship meant his mentorship. Going far meant going along with whatever he wanted. He started inviting me to lunch, just the 2 of us. When I made excuses, he'd frame it as a work requirement. "Part of your professional development," he'd explain. "You need to learn how business is really conducted. That happens over meals, not in conference rooms." During these lunches, he'd order wine and pressure me to drink. "Come on, live a little. You're always so buttoned up." When I'd stick to water, he'd joke about how I was no fun and needed to loosen up if I wanted to succeed in business. He'd tell me about his college days, his brief semi-professional football career, his connections in the industry, always with the underlying message that my success depended on staying in his good graces. "I like you, Delilah," he'd say, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "You remind me of myself when I was starting out, hungry, willing to do what it takes to get ahead." The breaking point came during our annual company retreat at the Riverside Resort, a sprawling complex 2 hours outside the city. The entire firm spent 3 days there for team building and strategic planning, though mostly it was an excuse for the partners to play golf and everyone else to drink by the pool. I'd managed to avoid Brendan for most of the retreat by staying close to groups of other employees. But on the final evening after the company dinner and award ceremony, I found myself alone at the hotel bar. Most people had either gone to bed or were continuing the party in someone's suite. I was catching up on emails before the next morning's early checkout. That's when Brendan appeared, sliding into the booth beside me before I could escape. He positioned himself to block my exit, trapping me against the wall. I could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the glassy look in his eyes that meant he'd been drinking steadily since the dinner ended. Well, he said, his voice thick with alcohol. "Look who's hiding out here all by herself, working even on vacation. That's dedication." "Just finishing up some client emails," I said, closing my laptop. "I should probably head to bed soon. Early flight tomorrow." "Hold on there, speed racer," he said, his hand landing on my arm to prevent me from standing. "The night's still young. We should talk." "About what?" I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. "About your future here," he said, his hand moving to my thigh. "You know, Delilah, you could advance a lot faster in this company if you were more cooperative, more of a team player." His fingers squeezed my leg, and I felt sick to my stomach. "I think I am a team player," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My performance reviews have been good." He laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Performance reviews? That's cute. You think this business is about spreadsheets and client reports? It's about relationships, sweetheart. Personal relationships." His hand moved higher on my thigh, and I tried to slide away. The booth was too narrow, and he was pressed against my side, using his body weight to keep me trapped. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, my heart starting to race. "No misunderstanding," he said, his face closer to mine now. "I've been patient with you for 6 months, giving you time to settle in, get comfortable, but I'm done waiting. You're going to come up to my room tonight, or your career here is over. Simple as that." His breath was hot against my cheek, and I could feel panic rising in my throat. This was really happening. After months of escalation, he was finally making his move. That's when I noticed something that changed everything. His phone was sitting on the table, screen facing up. A voice memo app was open, the red recording light blinking steadily. He was recording our conversation. "What's that for?" I asked, nodding toward the phone. He followed my gaze and grinned, showing teeth stained by red wine and whiskey. "Insurance policy, sweetheart. In case you get any bright ideas about reporting this conversation later. Your word against mine, except I'll have proof that you were flirting, asking for it, leading me on." He leaned closer, his lips almost touching my ear. "You think anyone's going to believe that sweet little Delilah was just an innocent victim? When I play them this recording of you agreeing to come to my room?" But Brendan had made one crucial mistake in his drunken confidence. He was too intoxicated to notice that I'd already switched our phones earlier in the evening. When he'd gone to the bathroom during dinner, I'd seen him leave his phone on the table. On impulse, I'd swapped it with mine. Our phones were identical models with the same black protective cases. The phone currently recording on the table was mine, which I'd immediately set to airplane mode. His actual phone, the one with all his contacts, photos, and files, was sitting in my purse. "You know what?" I said, forcing my voice to sound thoughtful rather than terrified. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I have been too focused on just the work side of things." His grip on my thigh loosened slightly as he smiled with satisfaction. "Now you're talking sense. I knew you were smarter than you let on." For the next 25 minutes, I let him talk, and talk, and talk. The alcohol had loosened his tongue completely, and his arrogance made him careless. He detailed exactly how the system worked at our firm, and apparently several others in the city, which managers were involved in the network, how they selected targets, what happened to women who refused their advances or tried to file complaints. "It's not just about sex," he explained, his hand still on my leg, but his focus now on bragging about his power. "It's about control, about knowing your place in the hierarchy. These young girls come in thinking they're going to change the world with their degrees and their ambition. Someone has to teach them how things really work." He named names, described specific incidents with other women, including some who'd left the company under mysterious circumstances. He bragged about having compromising photos of a junior associate named Rebecca, who'd been convinced to quit after refusing his advances. "Thomas in HR is key to the whole operation," he continued, apparently forgetting that he was supposedly recording this as evidence against me. "He buries any complaints that come in, makes the paperwork disappear, helps us build cases against troublemakers by documenting their performance issues and attitude problems." He described a network that extended beyond our firm, involving managers at competing companies who shared information about women who'd filed harassment complaints, effectively blacklisting them from the entire industry. "The beauty of it is, they do most of the work themselves," he said with a laugh. "They get so frustrated and demoralized that they just quit. Problem solved. No messy legal battles." The most damaging part came when he started talking about specific partners in the firm who were aware of his behavior and either participated or looked the other way because of his client relationships. "Harrison Webb knows exactly what's going on," he said, referring to the managing partner. "But I bring in $8 million a year in billings. What's he gonna do? Fire his golden goose because some secretary feels uncomfortable?" By the time he finally passed out in the booth, his head lolling back against the leather seat, I had 25 minutes of the most incriminating audio I could have imagined. But that was just the beginning. Back in my hotel room, I connected his phone to my laptop and discovered something that made my hands shake. Brendan had been recording voice memos for months, not just with me, but with other women. He thought he was creating insurance against false accusations, but what he'd actually done was document his own crimes in exhaustive detail. The phone contained 47 different audio files. Some were recordings of conversations with women he was harassing. Others were him talking to himself, planning his approaches, celebrating his successes, complaining about women who'd gotten away. In one particularly vile recording, he described in graphic detail what he'd done to Rebecca, the junior associate who'd quit. In another, he talked about photos he'd taken of women without their consent during company events. There were recordings of phone calls with other managers coordinating their efforts to push out problem employees. But the most shocking discovery was a folder of photos and videos. Pictures taken up women's skirts during meetings. Photos from the company Christmas party where he'd drugged women's drinks and photographed them in compromising positions. Videos recorded through the office windows of women changing clothes, thinking they had privacy. I spent the entire night downloading everything to multiple external drives and cloud storage accounts. By dawn, I had copies of nearly 6 months of evidence documenting a systematic pattern of sexual harassment, assault, drugging, and illegal surveillance involving at least 15 women and half a dozen male managers across 4 different companies. Monday morning, I walked into the office with a plan, but I didn't go to HR first. I didn't go to the partners. I went straight to the local news station. WZTN Channel 7 had an investigative unit led by reporter Roxanne Torres, who'd won awards for exposing corruption in local government and business. When I called and said I had evidence of a sexual harassment network involving multiple companies, she agreed to meet me immediately. "This is bigger than just workplace harassment," she said after reviewing just the first few recordings. "This is organized criminal activity. Drugging people, taking photos without consent, conspiracy to destroy careers. We're talking about felony charges." While she began preparing her investigation, I made copies of everything and started distributing them strategically. One package went to the State Labor Board, another to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, a third to the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. Then I did something that still makes me smile. I created an anonymous email account and sent selected recordings to every employee in our company, plus employees at the 3 other firms mentioned in Brendan's conversations. All 347 people received an email with the subject line, "The truth about sexual harassment at your workplace." I included a note. The attached recordings were made by the harassers themselves. They thought they were creating evidence to use against their victims. Instead, they documented their own crimes. If you've been a victim, you're not alone, and you now have proof. Tuesday morning, I walked into work to absolute chaos. The parking lot was full of news vans. Police cars were parked near the entrance. Through the glass doors, I could see people in suits who definitely weren't employees walking around with badges and briefcases. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with panic and fury. Brendan was screaming at Thomas from HR, demanding they trace the email and find out who'd leaked the recordings. 3 women from accounting were huddled in the main conference room with lawyers. The phones were ringing constantly with reporters, clients, and regulatory agencies demanding statements. "This is corporate espionage," Brendan was shouting. "Someone stole confidential files and distributed them illegally. I want arrests made." That's when FBI agent Sarah Mitchell approached him. "Actually, Mr. Morrison, the files we're interested in are the ones you created yourself." I watched from my cubicle as 2 federal agents escorted Brendan to a private office for questioning. His face had gone from red with anger to gray with fear in about 10 seconds. "Delilah?" Thomas from HR appeared at my desk, his usual smug confidence replaced by obvious panic. "We need to talk. Now." In his office, he tried to play good cop. "Look, I know Brendan can be intense sometimes, but we handle these things internally. Going to the media was unnecessary and damaging to everyone's careers, including yours." "What things?" I asked innocently. "I'm not sure what you mean." His eye twitched. "Don't play games with me. I know you're behind this somehow. The timing is too convenient." "Behind what?" I continued. "I came to work like any other day and found the office full of FBI agents. Maybe you should ask Brendan what he did to deserve federal attention." Before Thomas could respond, Agent Mitchell knocked on the door. "Mr. Thomas, we need to speak with you about your role in suppressing harassment complaints and destroying personnel files." I excused myself and returned to my desk, where I pretended to work while watching the drama unfold around me. By lunchtime, 4 more employees had been taken for questioning, including 2 senior managers whose names had appeared in Brendan's recordings. The news story broke that evening during the 6 o'clock broadcast. Roxanne Torres had worked around the clock to verify the recordings and gather additional testimony. Her investigation revealed a network of sexual harassment spanning 6 companies in the metropolitan area, involving over 30 women and at least 12 male managers. These recordings, made by the perpetrators themselves, document a systematic campaign of sexual harassment, assault, and career sabotage, Torres reported. Federal investigators say this may be the largest workplace harassment conspiracy ever uncovered in this region. The story included interviews with 5 women who'd been targeted by the network. Their faces were obscured, but their stories were devastating. One woman described being drugged at a company party and waking up with photos of herself being circulated among male managers. Another told of being forced out of her job after refusing sexual advances, only to find that she'd been blacklisted from other companies in the industry. By Thursday, the story had gone national. CNN picked it up, then the major networks. The hashtag recorded evidence started trending on social media as women across the country shared their own stories of workplace harassment. Our firm's stock price dropped 60% in 3 days. Major clients began canceling contracts. The state attorney general announced a formal investigation into the entire industry's hiring and promotion practices. Friday morning, I was called into the managing partner's office. I expected to be fired, sued, or worse. Instead, I found Harrison Webb looking like he'd aged 10 years in 1 week. "Miss Delilah," he said, standing when I entered, "I owe you an apology. A profound, personal apology." He gestured for me to sit, then surprised me by taking the chair next to mine rather than staying behind his imposing desk. "I've spent the last 3 days listening to those recordings," he said, his voice heavy. "Hearing my company described as a hunting ground, hearing about crimes committed in our offices with our equipment during company time. I'm ashamed that this happened under my leadership." He explained that the firm's board of directors had met in emergency session and voted unanimously to implement sweeping changes. Brendan and Thomas were fired immediately, along with 4 other managers. An independent firm would handle all harassment complaints going forward. Sensitivity training would be mandatory for all employees, starting with senior management. "We're also promoting you to senior accountant, effective immediately," Webb said, "along with a 50% salary increase and a position on our newly formed ethics oversight committee. It's not enough, and it doesn't undo the harm that was done, but it's a start." "What about the other women who were targeted?" I asked. "We're reaching out to every woman named in those recordings to offer restitution and public apologies. Several have agreed to return to the company in elevated positions. Others are pursuing legal action, which we will not contest." "And Brendan?" Webb's face darkened. "Brendan Morrison will never work in this industry again. The FBI has charged him with multiple felonies, including sexual assault, drugging, invasion of privacy, and racketeering. His trial starts in 6 months." The real satisfaction came during that trial. 27 women testified against Brendan and his network. His wife had left him before the charges were even filed, taking their 2 children and moving back to her parents' house in another state. His $800,000 suburban home was in foreclosure. His country club membership had been revoked. None of his former golf buddies would take his calls. When the prosecutor asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up in the packed courtroom and looked directly at Brendan, who was seated at the defendant's table looking like a broken man. "Your Honor," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "Mr. Morrison told me I would never amount to anything in this industry, that I should just smile, accept his behavior, and be grateful for whatever scraps of advancement he chose to give me. He said I was naive to think the business world operated on merit rather than personal relationships." I paused and pulled out a folded acceptance letter from my jacket pocket. "I've been accepted to law school on a full academic scholarship. I'll be specializing in employment law and victims' rights." Mr. Morrison was right about one thing. This business is about relationships, but he was wrong about what kind of relationships matter. I gestured to the crowded courtroom, filled with women who'd come to support the victims. These are the relationships that matter. Women supporting other women, survivors helping survivors, people standing up for what's right instead of what's profitable. Brendan's shoulders shook and I realized he was crying. "Mr. Morrison thought he was teaching me about power," I continued. "Instead, he taught me something much more valuable. He taught me that predators always underestimate their victims. They see someone young, inexperienced, vulnerable, and they assume we're helpless. But we're not helpless. We're just waiting for the right moment to fight back." I folded the letter and put it back in my pocket. He also taught me that justice doesn't always come from the system. Sometimes you have to create your own justice. Sometimes the best way to end a war is to let your enemy defeat themselves. The judge sentenced Brendan to 5 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay $2.3 million in restitution to his victims. Thomas received 3 years for his role in the conspiracy. 6 other managers across the 4 companies received sentences ranging from probation to 18 months. As we left the courthouse, Roxanne Torres, who'd covered the entire trial, approached me. "I'm writing a book about workplace harassment networks and how technology is changing the game," she said. "Would you consider writing the foreword?" The book, titled Recorded Evidence: How Predators' Own Words Brought Down a Harassment Network, became a bestseller. My foreword opened with the line, "The most dangerous moment for any predator is when they start believing their own lies about being untouchable." 3 years later, I graduated law school at the top of my class. Roxanne had left journalism to become my business partner, and we opened Torres & Associates, specializing in employment law and workplace harassment cases. Our first major victory involved exposing a harassment network at a tech startup, using the perpetrator's own Slack messages and recorded Zoom calls as evidence. The firm where I'd worked as a junior accountant was now held up as a model for how companies should respond to harassment scandals. Harrison Webb regularly spoke at conferences about the importance of believing victims and taking swift action against predators. The recordings Ms. Delilah provided didn't just expose criminals, he'd say in his presentations. They saved our company's soul. During my law school graduation ceremony, I received an unexpected letter forwarded by the prison system. It was from Brendan, writing from federal prison. "I hope you're satisfied," it read. "You destroyed my entire life, my marriage, my career, everything I worked for. All over a misunderstanding. You could have just talked to me like an adult instead of playing games and setting traps." I wrote him back. One sentence. "You destroyed your own life." I just pressed play. Last month marked the 5-year anniversary of the scandal. Our law firm now employs 15 attorneys and has offices in 3 cities. We've handled over 200 harassment cases with a 94% success rate. More importantly, we've seen real cultural change in how companies handle these issues. 3 of Brendan's former victims now hold senior positions at Fortune 500 companies. Patricia from payroll is now the CFO of a major nonprofit. Rebecca, the junior associate who'd been forced out, became a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime. "You gave us our voices back," Rebecca told me at a conference where we were both speakers. "Not just by exposing what happened, but by showing us that we had more power than we realized." I still keep that original recording on my phone, though I've never had to use it again. Not for legal reasons. The case is long closed. I keep it as a reminder of something important. Predators count on their victims staying silent, staying scared, staying isolated. They see someone young, inexperienced, vulnerable, and they assume we're powerless. They think they can control the narrative, manipulate the evidence, and use their positions of authority to silence anyone who threatens them. But they always forget one crucial detail. Their biggest weakness is their own arrogance. They can't resist bragging about their power, documenting their conquests, building monuments to their own cleverness. Brendan started a war he thought he'd already won. He had all the advantages: age, experience, connections, institutional support. He controlled my career, my references, my future in the industry. What he didn't control was his own mouth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's letting your enemy destroy themselves while you document every word. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the system. Sometimes you have to record it yourself. And sometimes the most satisfying victory is when your oppressor realizes that they handed you the weapon you used to defeat them. Brendan thought he was teaching me my place in his world. Instead, he taught me to build a better world where predators like him have no place at all. I didn't start that war, but I definitely finished it.